My boss said I'd never get promoted. Then the CEO called with a $100,000 offer. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I stared at my computer screen, watching the cursor blink mockingly at the end of my latest project proposal. 3 years. 3 long years of this same cubicle, this same view of Greg's corner office, this same feeling of being trapped behind invisible walls. Maya. Greg's voice cut through the office chatter like a rusty knife. Conference room. Now. I grabbed my notebook and hurried toward the glass-walled meeting room, my heels clicking against the polished floor. Through the transparent walls, I could see the usual suspects already seated around the mahogany table, the same faces that had witnessed my professional humiliation more times than I cared to count. There she is, Greg announced with that patronizing smile that made my skin crawl. Maya, tell everyone about your brilliant idea for the Morrison account. My heart sank. This was it, another setup. Greg had this twisted ritual where he'd ask me to present my ideas, let me get halfway through my pitch, and then systematically tear it apart in front of everyone. But I'd learned to prepare for these moments. I'd spent hours perfecting this proposal, researching every angle, anticipating every objection. Well, I began, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. I've been analyzing Morrison's market position, and I believe we can increase their customer retention by 40% through a targeted digital transformation strategy. The room fell silent. Even Sarah from accounting looked up from her phone. I continued, explaining the 3-phase approach I'd developed, the cost-benefit analysis I'd run, the case studies I'd compiled. For once, I had their attention. Interesting, Greg said, leaning back in his chair with that familiar smirk. But Maya, honey, you're thinking too small. What about the big picture? What about scalability? What about... I actually addressed that in phase 3. I interrupted, something I'd never done before. If you look at the projected growth metrics... Maya. Greg's voice turned sharp. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but let's be realistic here. You're not leadership material. This kind of strategic thinking? That's above your pay grade. The familiar laughter rippled around the table. Not cruel laughter. That would have been easier to handle. This was worse. This was the kind of comfortable chuckling that comes when everyone agrees with an obvious truth. The kind that says, oh, Maya, always reaching for stars she can't touch. I think Maya's onto something, said a voice from the back. Everyone turned to see James from the strategy team. The retention angle is exactly what Morrison needs. Greg's smile tightened. James, you're missing the complexity here. Maya's been solid where she is, but this level of strategic planning requires experience she simply doesn't have. But the research is thorough, James pressed. And the ROI projections are theoretical. Greg cut him off. Maya, why don't you focus on what you do best? Data analysis, support work. Leave the big thinking to the people who understand client relations. I felt my face burn. 3 years of staying late, of fixing crises that Greg's big thinking had created, of quietly building relationships across departments while he took credit for my work. 3 years of being told I was solid where I was, while watching less qualified colleagues leap over me on the corporate ladder. Of course, Greg, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. As the meeting dispersed, I caught my reflection in the conference room window. 29 years old, with an MBA from Northwestern, 3 years of flawless performance reviews, and still trapped in the same entry-level position. Still being told I wasn't leadership material by a man who never successfully managed a project without my behind-the-scenes intervention. Back at my desk, I opened my laptop and began typing the watered-down version of my proposal that Greg would present to Morrison next week. The version that would have his name on it, his signature, his credit. The version that would probably get him another promotion, while I remained invisible. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister. How was the presentation? I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. Same as always. But as I hit send, I made a decision. I pulled up a fresh document and began typing the full version of my Morrison proposal. The one with teeth. The one that could actually transform their business. I might not be allowed to present it, but I would make sure it existed. Somewhere in the corporate machinery, there had to be someone who could see past Greg's gatekeeping. I didn't know it then, but someone was already watching. Someone who had been quietly tracking my work, reading my reports, and noticing the gap between my contributions and my recognition. Someone who would soon change everything. But first, I had to survive another day in this cubicle, another day of being told I wasn't enough, another day of watching Greg climb higher on the ladder I'd built for him. As the office emptied around me, I stayed late once again, polishing my proposal, preparing for a battle I didn't even know I was fighting. In the reflection of my computer screen, I saw something I hadn't seen in months, a spark of defiance in my own eyes.
Greg was wrong about me.
I wasn't just solid where I was. I was a force waiting to be unleashed. I just needed someone to see it. Looking back now, I realized the universe had been dropping breadcrumbs all along. But when you're drowning in daily humiliation and fighting just to keep your head above water, it's hard to notice the life preservers floating nearby. It started 3 months ago with Victoria Martinez, the VP of Strategy. I was rushing through the lobby, arms full of client files, when she appeared beside me like a guardian angel in a Chanel suit. "Maya, right?" she said, her voice warm despite the early morning chaos. "I keep hearing great things about you." I nearly dropped my files. Victoria Martinez, the woman who'd restructured our entire West Coast division, who'd been featured on the cover of Business Weekly, knew my name. "Oh, thank you," I stammered, sure she had me confused with someone else. "I'm just brilliant," she finished with a knowing smile. "The Morrison preliminary report? Exceptional work. Keep it up." She swept toward the elevators, leaving me standing there like a deer in headlights. The Morrison preliminary report had been buried in a stack of documents Greg submitted under his name. How had she known I wrote it? Then there was the incident with David Chun, head of client relations. I'd been pulling another late night, trying to salvage a relationship with the Patterson Group after Greg had botched their quarterly review. The client was threatening to walk, and I'd spent hours crafting a recovery strategy that addressed every concern they'd raised. At 10 p.m., my email chimed. David Chun had CC'd me directly, not Greg, not the whole team, just me, on his message to Patterson's CEO. Maya Thompson's strategic intervention saved this relationship. Her understanding of your needs and swift action prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss. Thank you for your exceptional work, Maya. I stared at the email until my eyes burned. When had David been watching? How did he know it was my intervention and not Greg's leadership? I forwarded the email to Greg with a simple note. "Thought you should see this." His response came back within minutes. "Good support work. That's what team players do. Support work. Not strategic intervention. Not exceptional work. Just support." But the most surreal moment came during our quarterly all-hands meeting. Richard Hawthorne, a senior executive I'd only seen from a distance, approached Greg after his presentation about innovative client retention strategies that were, word for word, lifted from my Morrison proposal. "Greg," Richard said, his voice carrying across the break room, "impressive work on the Morrison framework. Is Maya Thompson in line for the leadership development program?" I was refilling my coffee cup 20 feet away, but I heard every word. My hand froze mid-pour as I waited for Greg's response. Greg's laugh was loud and dismissive.
"Maya?
"Oh, she's not there yet. Still learning the ropes, you know? Great with data analysis, but strategic thinking? That's a whole different skill set." Richard's eyebrows raised slightly. "Interesting. Well, the work speaks for itself." I wanted to scream. The work did speak for itself. It was my work, my late nights, my innovative thinking. But somehow, in Greg's mouth, it became evidence of his leadership while simultaneously proving my limitations. That night, I called my college roommate Jessica, who worked in corporate HR at a tech company in San Francisco. "It's like I'm invisible," I told her, pacing my apartment. "They see the results, but they can't see me." "Maya," Jessica said gently, "have you considered that maybe some people do see you? Maybe the right people?" "What do you mean?" VPs don't just randomly compliment junior staff. Department heads don't CC analysts directly on client thank you emails. Senior executives don't ask about specific people's development paths. These aren't coincidences, Maya. Someone's been talking about you. I sank into my couch, phone pressed to my ear. But if that's true, why am I still stuck here? Maybe you're not as stuck as you think. Maybe things are happening behind the scenes that you can't see yet. After we hung up, I sat in my dark apartment, city lights twinkling through my window. Jessica's words echoed in my mind. I'd been so focused on Greg's gatekeeping, so consumed by his daily dismissals, that I'd missed the bigger picture. Someone had been watching. Multiple someones, actually. They'd noticed my work, my late nights, my ability to save difficult situations. They'd seen through Greg's presentations to the real source of the innovative thinking. But recognition without action felt like cruel hope. What good was being noticed if nothing changed? What good were compliments if they didn't translate to advancement? I opened my laptop and pulled up my LinkedIn profile. Maybe it was time to stop waiting for change and start creating it myself. Maybe it was time to stop being invisible and start being unavoidable. What I didn't know was that I was already unavoidable. The conversations were already happening. The plans were already in motion. The call was coming. The Reynolds account landed on my desk like a ticking bomb wrapped in a bow. Greg dropped the file folder with theatrical flair, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Congratulations, Maya," he said, loud enough for half the office to hear. "You've just inherited our most challenging client." I opened the folder and felt my stomach drop. Reynolds Industries, the manufacturing giant known for chewing through consulting firms like they were disposable napkins. They'd fired our last 3 account teams, demanded refunds, and left scorching reviews that still haunted our company's reputation. "Greg," I said carefully, "don't you think someone with more experience should?" Maya. He clicked his tongue like I was a child asking for candy. "This is exactly what you need. A real challenge. Sink or swim time." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Leaders solve problems. If you can't handle Reynolds, well, maybe you're exactly where you belong." The message was crystal clear. This wasn't an opportunity, it was a setup. Greg wanted me to fail spectacularly so he could finally justify keeping me buried in my cubicle forever. My hands trembled as I read through the file. Reynolds CEO, Marcus Reynolds, was notorious for his explosive temper and impossible demands. In the past 6 months, he'd made 3 different firms cry, literally cry, during video calls. Their current crisis involved a supply chain disaster that had cost them millions, and they blamed their previous consultants for useless theoretical garbage. I had 2 weeks to turn around a situation that seasoned partners had spent months screwing up. "Need help with anything?" asked Sarah from the neighboring cubicle, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I'm fine," I lied, closing the folder. But I wasn't fine. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Greg's words. Leaders solve problems. The implication was clear. I wasn't a leader, so I couldn't solve this problem. I was being set up to prove his point. The next morning, I arrived at the office at 6 a.m. and dove into Reynolds' case files. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. 3 consulting teams had proposed the same generic solutions: cost-cutting measures, efficiency audits, standard operational reviews. No wonder Marcus Reynolds was furious. His company was bleeding money, and everyone kept offering him Band-Aids for a severed artery. I spent the weekend in the office, surviving on coffee and determination. I called suppliers, analyzed shipping routes, studied Reynolds' customer base. I reached out to my network, the relationships I'd quietly built over 3 years while Greg took credit for my work. By Sunday night, I had something. Not a Band-Aid, but actual surgery. A complete supply chain restructuring that would require short-term pain, but could save Reynolds millions in the long run. It was risky, innovative, and exactly the kind of bold thinking that terrified most consultants. Monday morning, I requested a call with Marcus Reynolds himself. Greg's secretary, Linda, looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Maya, honey, Marcus Reynolds eats junior staff for breakfast. Maybe you should run this by Greg first. Greg's in meetings all morning." I said, which was true. This can't wait. The video call was scheduled for 2 p.m. I spent the morning rehearsing, refining my presentation, and trying to ignore the growing crowd of colleagues who'd heard about my death wish meeting. At 2 p.m. sharp, Marcus Reynolds' face filled my screen. He looked exactly as intimidating as his reputation suggested: steel gray hair, piercing eyes, and a scowl that could melt titanium. "You're not who I was expecting," he said bluntly. "No, sir, I'm Maya Thompson. I've been reviewing your account, and I think we've been approaching this all wrong." His eyebrows raised. "Oh, really? And what makes you think you know better than the last 3 teams?" My heart hammered, but I launched into my presentation. I explained how previous consultants had focused on symptoms instead of causes, how their solutions would have created new problems, how my approach addressed the root issues. 20 minutes in, something shifted. Marcus leaned forward, asked pointed questions, challenged my assumptions. But he was engaged, not dismissive. He was treating me like an equal, not like a junior analyst fumbling through her first real assignment. "This is interesting," he said finally. "Risky, but interesting. How confident are you in these projections?" "Confident enough to stake my reputation on them," I replied. He smiled, actually smiled. "I like that. Let's do it." 2 weeks later, the results were undeniable. Reynolds' supply chain was functioning smoother than it had in years. Customer satisfaction scores jumped 30%. Most importantly, they'd renewed their contract and doubled their commitment. I was in the break room when I heard Greg's voice booming across the office. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to announce that our innovative strategy has saved the Reynolds account." Our strategy. Our innovation. My blood boiled as I listened to him take credit for every late night, every risky decision, every moment of brilliance that had salvaged this impossible situation. That night, I went home and cried. Not tears of sadness, but rage. I'd proven myself beyond any doubt, saved a client everyone else had written off, and still remained invisible. The glass ceiling wasn't just above me, it was reinforced steel, and Greg held the only key. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, mascara streaking down my cheeks. "You'll never move up here, Maya," I whispered, echoing Greg's words from the morning after my triumph. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was fighting a battle I could never win. But sometimes the universe has other plans. 2 days after Greg's triumphant town hall speech, I was drowning in spreadsheets when my desk phone rang. The caller ID showed an extension I didn't recognize, for digits that seemed to pulse with importance. "Maya Thompson speaking," I answered, expecting another vendor call, or maybe someone from IT. "Hi Maya, this is Alice Whitman." The world stopped. Alice Whitman, the CEO. The woman whose corner office occupied half the top floor, whose picture graced the lobby wall, whose quarterly addresses shaped our entire company's direction. Alice Whitman was calling me, directly, on my desk phone. I'm sorry, who is this?" I stammered, convinced someone was playing an elaborate prank. "Alice Whitman, CEO," she repeated, her voice warm and slightly amused. "I wanted to personally thank you for your work on the Reynolds account." "Stellar work, Maya. Absolutely stellar." My hands began to shake. How did she know? The Reynolds success had been credited to Greg's team, his leadership, his innovative thinking. My name hadn't appeared in any of the internal communications. "Thank you," I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible. "I've been following your progress for quite some time," Alice continued, as if discussing the weather. "The Morrison Framework, the Patterson Group recovery, the innovative supply chain restructuring for Reynolds, your fingerprints are all over our most successful client outcomes this year." I felt dizzy. She knew. She actually knew it was my work. While Greg had been taking credit and I'd been drowning in invisibility, Alice Whitman had been watching, cataloging, recognizing. "I appreciate you saying that," I said, finding my voice. "But I should mention that Greg led those initiatives." "Maya," Alice interrupted gently, "I've been in this business for 25 years. I know the difference between leadership and authorship. I know who develops the strategies and who presents them. More importantly, I know talent when I see it. The office around me faded into background noise. Colleagues walked by my cubicle. Phones rang. Keyboards clicked. But all I could hear was Alice Whitman's voice telling me she saw my talent. "Which brings me to why I'm calling," she continued. "I'd like to offer you a position. Senior Innovation Lead, reporting directly to the Strategy Department. It's a newly created role, designed for someone with your particular skills and vision." Senior Innovation Lead. The title alone made my heart race. After 3 years of being told I wasn't leadership material, the CEO was offering me a senior position. The compensation package starts at $100,000 annually, Alice continued matter-of-factly, plus performance bonuses, equity options, and full executive benefits. "Can you come by my office this afternoon to discuss details?" $100,000. I'd been making $52,000 in my current role, fighting for every small raise, being told I should be grateful for what I had. Now Alice Whitman was offering me nearly double that, plus bonuses I never dared dream about. Yes, absolutely," I said, trying to keep my voice professional while my inner voice screamed with joy. "Excellent. How does 3 p.m. sound?" "Perfect. Thank you so much, Ms. Whitman. I mean Alice. Her laugh was genuine and kind. "Alice is fine.
And Maya?
You've earned this. Every bit of it." The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone like it might explain what had just happened. Around me, the office continued its normal rhythm, completely unaware that my world had just been turned upside down. I sat back in my chair, Greg's words from last week echoing in my mind. "You'll never move up here, Maya." The irony was so perfect it almost hurt. While he'd been blocking my advancement, dismissing my potential, and stealing credit for my work, the CEO had been building a case for my promotion. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. "How's work today?" I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. How could I possibly explain what had just happened? How could I put into words that the CEO had called me directly, that she'd been watching my work, that she was offering me a position that would change everything? Instead, I typed, "I'll call you tonight." Something incredible just happened. I stood up from my desk, legs shaky, and walked toward the bathroom. I needed to splash cold water on my face to make sure I wasn't dreaming. In the mirror, I saw someone I barely recognized, a woman with bright eyes and a smile that couldn't be contained. 3 hours. In 3 hours, I would walk into Alice Whitman's office and accept a role that would launch me past everyone who'd ever told me I wasn't ready, wasn't qualified, wasn't leadership material. I thought about Greg, probably sitting in his office right now, basking in the glory of his Reynolds success. I thought about all the meetings where he dismissed my ideas, all the times he'd taken credit for my innovations, all the performance reviews where he'd told me I was solid where I was. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't solid where I was. I was about to soar. The best part? Greg had no idea what was coming. At 2:45 p.m., I walked through the office with purpose I hadn't felt in years. My heels clicked against the polished floor with a rhythm that felt like a countdown to freedom. Colleagues glanced up from their desks, probably wondering why I looked different. Straighter posture, brighter eyes, a smile that couldn't be completely hidden. I had to pass Greg's corner office to reach the elevator bank that led to the executive floor. Through his glass walls, I could see him leaning back in his leather chair, feet up on his desk, talking animatedly on the phone. Probably telling someone else about his Reynolds triumph. "Maya." His voice boomed through the office as I walked by. "Where are you headed?" "It's almost 3 p.m. I paused, turning to face him through his open doorway. For 3 years, that question would have sent anxiety spiraling through my chest. "Where are you going? Why aren't you at your desk? What's more important than the work I've assigned you?" Today, it felt like victory. "To Alice's office," I said, my voice steady and clear. "She called me." The phone slipped from Greg's hand. I watched his face transform in slow motion, the confident smirk melting into confusion, then disbelief, then something that looked suspiciously like panic. "Alice? Alice Whitman?" "The CEO, Alice." He sat up so fast his chair spun. "Why would she? What does she want with me?" I finished for him, enjoying the way his mouth hung open. She wants to discuss a position. Senior Innovation Lead. The color drained from Greg's face. For the first time in 3 years, Greg Mitchell, the man who'd made a career out of having all the answers, had absolutely nothing to say. I should get going, I said pleasantly. Don't want to keep her waiting. I turned and walked toward the elevator, leaving Greg frozen in his office doorway. Behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of his phone clattering to the floor. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like ascending to another world. Marble floors replaced industrial carpet. Original artwork hung where motivational posters usually lived. The air even smelled different, expensive like success and possibility. Alice's assistant, a poised woman in her 50s, smiled warmly as I approached.
Maya?
Alice is expecting you. Go right in. The CEO's office was everything I'd imagined and more. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. A mahogany desk that probably cost more than my annual salary commanded the space. But what struck me most was Alice herself. She looked up from her laptop with genuine warmth, not the corporate mask I'd expected. Maya, please sit, she said, gesturing to the comfortable chairs arranged around a coffee table. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee? I'm fine, thank you, I said, settling into the chair and trying to process that I was actually here, actually having this conversation. Alice joined me, carrying a folder thick with documents. I want to be completely transparent with you, she began. I've been watching your work for over a year. Not just the outcomes, but the process. How you think, how you solve problems, how you handle pressure. She opened the folder, revealing printed emails, client feedback forms, and what looked like detailed notes about my various projects. The Morrison Framework, she continued, sliding a document toward me. Client called it revolutionary thinking. The Patterson Group recovery, David Chin wrote a detailed memo about your strategic intervention. And Reynolds. She smiled. Marcus Reynolds personally called me yesterday to rave about the analyst who finally understood his business. I stared at the papers, seeing my work validated in ways I'd never imagined. But Greg presented these initiatives. He got the credit. Maya, Alice said gently, I don't make decisions based on presentations. I make them based on impact. Greg is an adequate manager, but you're a strategist. There's a difference. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. I've been building a case for this promotion for months. The Senior Innovation Lead position wasn't just created, it was created for you. Your skills, your vision, your ability to see solutions others miss. I don't understand, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. If you've been watching me, why didn't you say something sooner? Alice's expression grew serious. Because I needed to see how you'd handle adversity, how you'd respond to being overlooked, undervalued, dismissed. Leadership isn't just about having good ideas. It's about persevering when no one believes in you. She stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the city. Every great leader faces moments when they're told they're not ready, not qualified, not enough. What matters is whether they keep pushing forward anyway. I almost quit, I admitted. But you didn't, Alice said, turning back to me. You stayed. You kept innovating. You kept proving your worth, even when no one seemed to notice. That's not just talent, Maya. That's character. She returned to her chair and slid a contract across the table. This is your offer. Senior Innovation Lead, $100,000 base salary, 15% performance bonus potential, full executive benefits, and equity options. You'll report directly to strategy with a team of 3 analysts and budget authority for innovation projects. I stared at the contract, my hands shaking. 3 years ago, I'd walked into this building as a hopeful graduate with dreams of making an impact. Today, I was being offered the chance to do exactly that. Maya, Alice said softly, you've been ready for this role for months. I was just waiting for the right moment to tell you. I looked up at her, this woman who'd seen my potential when I'd barely seen it myself. Thank you, I whispered. Don't thank me yet, Alice said with a grin. Wait until you see Greg's face when the announcement goes out tomorrow. For the first time in 3 years, I laughed with pure, unbridled joy. Monday morning arrived like Christmas and New Year's combined. I stood outside the building that had been my prison for 3 years, but everything looked different now. The same revolving doors, the same marble lobby, the same security guards, but I was seeing it all through new eyes. These weren't the eyes of someone hoping to survive another day. These were the eyes of someone who belonged here. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt surreal. Just 5 days ago, I'd been crying in my apartment, convinced I'd hit an unbreakable ceiling. Now I was carrying an executive key card, a company laptop with my new title engraved on it, and a confidence I'd forgotten I possessed. Maya called Jennifer from Strategy as I stepped off the elevator. Congratulations. We're so excited to have you on the team. Team, not support staff, not junior analyst. Team. My new office was 3 doors down from Alice's, with windows overlooking the city and space for the team I'd be building. As I set down my box of belongings, the same sad collection of personal items that had decorated my cubicle, my phone buzzed with notifications. LinkedIn messages, congratulatory emails, text messages from colleagues I'd barely spoken to before. The company-wide announcement had gone out at 8 a.m. sharp. We're pleased to announce Maya Thompson's promotion to Senior Innovation Lead, effective immediately. Maya will be spearheading our new strategic initiatives and leading a cross-functional innovation team. Please join us in congratulating Maya on this well-deserved advancement. Well-deserved. Those 2 words meant everything. Around 10 a.m., I heard familiar voices in the hallway. Through my open door, I could see Greg talking animatedly with 2 other managers, his gestures sharp and agitated. It came out of nowhere, he was saying. I mean, Maya's good with data, but senior innovation-led? She's been an analyst for 3 years. Didn't she handle the Reynolds situation? Asked Sarah from HR. My team handled Reynolds, Greg corrected quickly. Maya provided support, but the strategic thinking, the client management, that was all leadership-level work. I smiled, remembering Alice's words. I know the difference between leadership and authorship. A knock on my doorframe interrupted my eavesdropping. James from Strategy stood there holding 2 coffee cups and grinning. Thought you might need some fuel for your first day, he said, handing me a cup. Fair trade warning. Everyone's talking about your promotion. Greg looks like he swallowed a lemon. Is he really that surprised? I asked. James sat down across from my desk, his expression growing serious. Maya, anyone who's been paying attention knew this was coming. Your work speaks for itself. Greg's just Greg. He sees what he wants to see. At lunch, I walked through the main office to grab something from the cafeteria. The energy was different now. People who'd barely acknowledged me before nodded respectfully. Some stopped to congratulate me personally. Others just watched with a mixture of surprise and something that looked like newfound respect. But the real moment came when I passed Greg's office. He was on a call, but his eyes tracked my movement through the glass. When I looked directly at him, he quickly averted his gaze. Gone was the smug confidence, the patronizing smile, the casual dismissal. In its place was something I'd never seen before: uncertainty. That afternoon, Keisha Williams, a young Black woman from the analytics team, knocked on my door. She looked nervous, fidgeting with her notebook. Miss Thompson, I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to ask, how did you do it? I gestured for her to sit down. What do you mean? I've been here 8 months, she said quietly. Same story, great work, no recognition. My manager takes credit for my analysis, tells me I'm not ready for bigger responsibilities. When I heard about your promotion, I just wondered, how did you make them see you? Looking at Keisha, I saw myself 3 years ago, talented, driven, but invisible to the people who mattered. Her question hit me like a revelation. This wasn't just about my personal victory. This was about what came next. Keisha, I said, leaning forward, the truth is I didn't make them see me. I kept doing exceptional work until the right person noticed. But here's what I learned. There's always someone watching, even when it doesn't feel like it. I opened my laptop and pulled up a document. I'm building a team. 3 analysts, with room for growth and direct exposure to executive leadership. I need people who think strategically, who aren't afraid of challenges, who can see solutions others miss. I looked at her directly. Are you interested? Keisha's eyes widened. You mean you'd consider me for your team? I don't consider talent based on tenure or drama, I said, echoing Alice's words. I consider it based on impact. 2 hours later, I had my first team meeting scheduled and 3 potential candidates identified. As the office began to empty for the day, I stood at my window watching the city lights flicker on. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. Saw your LinkedIn update. So proud. Tell me everything. I typed back. Keep shining, even when they tell you you're invisible. Someone's always watching. Because that's what I'd learned. That's what I wanted every young woman like Keisha to know. That excellence has a way of rising, even through the thickest ceiling. That recognition might come from unexpected places, at unexpected times. That sometimes the call you never expect changes everything. 3 years of being told I wasn't leadership material had ended with me becoming exactly the leader I was meant to be. And now I was just getting started.